Okay, welcome, welcome, welcome. I know we're a short group right now, or a small group, I should say. There'll probably be some people coming in as we get set up and going. So you may hear that noise as people enter the room. But the good news is it's going to be a short day because originally I had two PowerPoints for this week, and Muskegon canceled Tuesday. So, thank you for joining me today. A little unconventionally, but I don't know about you. Last night the roads were slick by me, and today it is 16 degrees outside. And yeah, I want to go out there. So, thank you for joining me. And we'll get started. We're just going to talk about arts, media, and sports. Full disclosure, sports are at the very end if you're a big sports fan. We don't get heavy into it partially because I personally do not have as much experience with sports, so I don't have as much like anecdotal evidence for you. But we will talk about sports a little bit at the end. So to get started, to talk about Upper Paleolithic art, what we consider art, we'll get into in a couple slides. Usually, if I say art, a lot of us are going to think paintings, music, statues, and that definitely counts. But a lot of the paintings long time ago look very different. Some of the sculptures look different. And I would argue tool creation would count as art. Some tools, let me minimize this, you can kind of see um, they've got like carved handles here where it's a beautiful, intricate horse. But tool creation in general, I would argue could count as an art because stone tools or bone tools, you're taking a rock and you're having the artistic ability to look at that rock and say, I can turn that rock into a hand axe, and you know how. I would argue that takes some skill and probably some artistic skill and creative skill as well. Looking at Upper Paleolithic art, one great example is the Chauvet Pont d'Arc cave in France. It dates to about 32,000 years before present. And what's really interesting about this cave is the animals depicted are proportionate. So a lot of times they're life size or they're at least proportionate to the other animals around them. And there's a lot of theories about why we were creating this art. It was humans, it was Homo sapiens. And there are a few different reasons. Realistically, because we can't go back in time, we may never know 100% for sure why they painted them. A few theories include could have just been art for art's sake. It's pretty to look at. Could have been used for storytelling or religious reasons. And it also could have been a type of manifestation. We talk about manifestation nowadays, but this would have looked like, okay, me and my buddies are going to go do a hunt tomorrow and we want it to be successful. So I'm going to paint us having a successful hunt and getting a wild boar. And the idea is when I paint it, I can make it a reality tomorrow and it'll help manifest a successful hunt. We've also seen evidence for animals in motion. So the four horse heads. In the center picture, it's on the left. In the bottom picture, it's in the center. And what's really cool is, yeah, it could be depicting four different horses. Or if you're standing in front of it with an open flame like a torch or a campfire, the flames dance and move and make the shadows move. And so it kind of makes it look like one horse running rather than four separate horse heads, which is pretty advanced for 32, 34,000 years ago. And the cool thing is, it gives us a glimpse of what the animals looked like. When we're doing paleontology, paleoarchaeology, and we're digging up animal bones, we only have the bones to go off if the animal no longer exists. So, like, we've been able to figure out if the European lion, which no longer exists, had a mane or not, like the African lion. And I might be wrong, but I think the answer is no. I believe the European lion did not have a mane. It was similar to like cougars in this continent. And if you want to watch a short video, I'm skipping it for time today. Um, there is one linked on this slide. Basically, in order to preserve the cave paintings, France knew, okay, we can't bring a bunch of tourists into this cave all day, every day. It's going to damage the cave paintings. So what they did, it was pretty interesting. They recreated the entire cave. They made a scale replica of the cave and all of the paintings, and they made the atmosphere as cave-like as possible. So now you can tour the fake cave. And yeah, part of me is gonna know, okay, that's not the real cave, but I can't see the real cave. So that's the next best thing. And I think that would be really cool to see someday. I mean, it's in France, so I don't know if I'll get there, but we'll see. Trying to figure out what the arts are. Kotak was pretty vague. He basically just gave examples, music, performance arts, visual arts, storytelling, and literature, both written and oral. We hear the term aesthetics a lot nowadays, usually accompanied with some specific type of aesthetic, like the clean girl aesthetic or cottagecore aesthetic. You see it all over like TikTok, Instagram, things like that. Technically, aesthetics are the appreciation of qualities perceived in art. So being able to understand the different techniques and different qualities and kind of appreciate them. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so today. Um, Probably just the weather. Expressive culture when we're talking art. I know it's a little confusing because I was talking a couple weeks ago about expressive versus stoic, and expressive people being, louder, more dramatic. In this instance, Kodak is talking more about a term used to describe manifestations of human creativity, such as dance, music, painting, cloth, stories, drama, and comedy. In our culture, we have a tendency to think of art as separate from the rest of life. We don't think of art as necessary. We think of it as an added bonus. And for some people, that works. For smaller scale societies, they usually don't view it that way. Their art is integral to their way of life. So it's one of those things where here we oftentimes assume you only create art if you are an artist, meaning you've been classically trained, you do art for a living to make money. Versus in reality, we can make art throughout our day. It doesn't have to be. Okay, I don't know if you yeah, I don't know if you could hear me. My Zoom just went like kaput. So, I'm sorry about that. It's back. Hooray. Is it still recording? I don't know. Let's find out. It's still recording. That'll be interesting. Okay. Sorry about that. Fun technology. Anyways, what I was gonna say is small scale societies basically view art as integral to life. Kind of the idea that we make art because that's what we do. We're humans. And I think a lot of us can adapt that. Maybe I'm a arty nerd, but I think creating art throughout the day or throughout the week, maybe not every day, I think it can be beneficial to us. I think what the problem is, a lot of us we expect us to only make art if we're, quote, good at it. And so we're kind of perfectionists about it. And I think even a little doodle in your notes or making a good meal, that is art. And I think it can be more integral to our lives. Looking at art and religion, I'm going to turn my hotspot on my phone because it keeps telling me my network is unstable. And I kind of want to make the joke of like, me too, but personal hotspot, turn it on just in case I need it. All right. So art and religion. Religion is a really common theme in art, especially Western art. Artwork is supposed to be something that stimulates and sustains contemplation, according to anthropologist Jacques Mackay. Kotak brings up Guernica, and I have a picture of it on the next slide. Um, we don't have to focus heavily on Guernica. He just mentions it a lot, but doesn't show you a picture of it. So I wanted to show you a picture. As Kotak says, the experience of art involves feelings such as being moved, as well as appreciation of form, such as balance or harmony. I have heard many art critics and artists say that the point of art is to make you feel something. And so I laugh. I'll show you an example of a mural that I do not like in a few slides. And I don't like hate it. It doesn't keep me up at night, but I don't like it. And at first, when I said I didn't like it, I felt bad because I thought, oh, what if I say that in front of the artist? But I realized that me saying I don't like it, I'm not being mean about it. I'm not saying the technique is bad or that the art itself is poorly done. I'm just saying it doesn't resonate with me. And if art is supposed to make you feel something, then technically disgust is an emotion. And it has elicited a little bit of disgust is a strong word, but apathy maybe? I don't know. This is what Guernica looks like. What does not do it justice, one, you can't see like the brush strokes and things like that in this photo. Two, it is very, very large. It is taller than the average person. It's when it's in a museum, it usually ends up going from ceiling to floor, and it is very big. So I bring that up because I've never seen it in person, but my understanding is it can feel a little overwhelming and bombarding in person because the art style is a bit more surreal and because it's so big. Sometimes we feel a little small when we're faced with giant art, which can kind of add to what the artist is trying to convey. Western art frequently, like I said, has religious inspiration. And especially when we look at like medieval art or Renaissance art, there is a lot of Christian inspiration there. And one of the main reasons is because it sold. Christianity was very, very popular at the time, and so the higher ups that could afford good art wanted religious art, and so artists, even if we're talking about like in the 5th century, they had to pay their bills. And if you know artists or are an artist, you know that sometimes, as much as you would love to just be a vagabond bohemian artist who lives off their art, you also know that you got bills to pay. So you have to make art that sells, and religious art sells. So we have a lot of it. That is not me talking down on religious art, but that's one of the reasons why we have so much. Western art loves religion. A great example is the Sistine Chapel. If I mention the Sistine Chapel to you or like a person on the street, most of us are going to be thinking of the inside of the chapel because the ceilings are painted, I believe, by Michelangelo, and they are beautiful. They're beautifully done. I would love to see it someday. But I included a photo of the outside of the Sistine Chapel because I had the realization when I was reading and prepping for this that I've never been there, so I know what the inside looks like, but I had no idea what the outside looked like. And when I looked it up, this is what it looks like, and I would argue that the building itself is art. Architecture is art. Now, this is where I become a grumpy old lady. Um, I think as a society, we are in a phase, and I say phase because I hope it doesn't last, where we have lost the art in architecture. Our newer buildings, especially like around town, in my opinion, are boring. They are just rectangles. They are usually very drab colors, and they do not have any kind of ornamentation. And that may be tied to our economy as well. But I am noticing, in my opinion, our recent architecture has been boring. And it bums me out because I love the whimsy. I love the uniqueness. I love a gargoyle. So I would like to see some more. We have a tendency to house art separately from the rest of our daily lives. So we put it in museums and you have to pay to get in, and it's all art. And therefore, we have a tendency to think all good art belongs in a museum versus small scale societies. They don't have enough buildings to have a museum. So the art is in everyday life. It's in the buildings they use every day. It's in their homes. And it's really not separated from religion. This is the famous example of Michelangelo's paintings inside the Sistine Chapel. This is the famous Birth of Man or Creation of Man, where you have God and the angels on the right, and Adam or the first human on the left, and God is kind of breathing life into him. Now, some art critics and historians argue that Michelangelo had a second meaning because this cape behind God and the angels kind of is the same shape as a human brain. So some critics argue that Michelangelo was trying to say that the best thing about humans is our brain and God created our brain. I don't know. I can't go back in time and ask him. So I'll let you decide if it's a brain or not, but it is interesting that it's very similar shape. Could have been a fluke. I don't know. So where do we find our art? Location and placement is important, especially in Western society, like I said. If you are an artist, non-artists, their go-to compliment, if they like your art, is to say, "Oh my God, that's beautiful. This should be in a museum." Because we think only the best of the best is in a museum. Realistically, other art can also be located around town. So very frequently, especially in Grand Rapids, we have Art Prize where art is outside or in venues that aren't museums, like a bar or a restaurant. And it's kind of cool because it makes it more accessible because you don't have to pay to get in. Or you might not even know there's art there. You might just go to your favorite restaurant and surprise, there's like a sculpture there as part of Art Prize. So we're gonna look into graffiti and street art. Give me just a moment here. Oops. Hey, sorry, a little interruption. Um, Back to my PowerPoint. So, oh, that's the only slide. Okay, so graffiti and street art. I'm going to talk about graffiti a little bit and kind of the difference between that and street art and why I think street art is really important to a city's vitalization. Graffiti is technically illegal street art. So technically graffiti would count as street art. But usually we differentiate between illegal and permitted street art. Graffiti is not permitted. And it oftentimes includes the name of the artist. And in fact, in graffiti, if you only spray paint your name, it's called tagging. And what's interesting is this kind of graffiti is often associated with poor neighborhoods, crime, and dirty streets. And I think part of the reason is because, yes, it has shown up in poor neighborhoods because they don't have the money to scrub it off, versus a wealthy neighborhood, if a street artist shows up and tags, say, a stop sign, the wealthy neighborhood can afford to replace that stop sign right away versus a poorer neighborhood may have to wait so the graffiti stays longer. Oftentimes, graffiti includes crude or profane language, and I do understand if you have like children, why you wouldn't want them to see something vulgar or nasty or a curse word. I get that. But unfortunately, because we have that connotation, we expect any kind of street art often to then be graffiti. And we think graffiti is bad, it's ugly, it's bad art or lazy art. And while, yeah, some of the graffiti, when you're just tagging your name, that may not be that creative. But one, graffiti artists usually come up with a signature, a specific way of doing their name that is very artistic. And two, I would also say I've seen tons of graffiti that's gorgeous. When I talk about vulgar language, so here's a great example. This one on the right, excuse my language, says fuck police. The reason why I bring it up is what made me chuckle is this is somebody just being mad at the cops, and somebody else was offended. But what makes me chuckle is I personally would think the offensive part would be the F word, but clearly they were more mad at police. So they kind of tried to blot it out. And this was an older picture, so the funny thing is this is before the organization ICE existed. But now that they tried to take off the PO and tried to make police, managed to make it say fuck ICE, which makes me laugh because I'm like, it's still vulgar. Like I would have focused on the curse word. Sometimes graffiti artists talk to each other. The one on the right is in a dark tunnel, and somebody spray painted joy, and somebody else said dark tunnels. I don't give a shit. So you can see how they'll kind of talk to each other. When we see art being commissioned by the city, it is called street art, and Grand Rapids has a ton of them. I know a lot of you may not live in Grand Rapids. I'm trying, and right now the weather is not great. I'm trying to go around like Coopersville and Muskegon and see if I can find more street art so that I'm a little more inclusive here. But this is heavy on Grand Rapids because that's where I live. So this is the street art I pass all the time. This is on the side of a restaurant, and I've been in that restaurant exactly once. It's a nice restaurant, nothing against it. I just not my style. Um, if somebody said meet me at Graydon's Crossing, I would have to Google and double check it's the same restaurant I'm thinking of. But if they said meet me at the restaurant with the pretty lion on the side, I would know exactly what they meant. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I know that restaurant." Because I pass that lion like 4 times a week. The movement towards street art instead of graffiti is aiming to switch from traditional crude and sloppy graffiti to art that can decorate the streets and have a positive effect on the city. There have been psychological studies that show that we do better with bright colors, or at least some colors. That is why it's a bummer. If you've ever lived in an apartment, most apartment buildings paint all the rooms the same, like eggshell white, and it's really boring, in my opinion. And typically, you can't paint the walls a different color, or if you can, but you're never going to get your security deposit back. So most of us don't do that. So me personally, whenever I move into a new apartment, the first thing that goes up is my art. Any posters, any art, any photos, because I don't want to just stare at blank walls. And that is because psychologically, I know I do better when I have pretty things to look at. Similarly, we have, like I said, a lot of boring gray drab architecture. And if we can't come up with more exciting architecture, we can at least paint the sides of the buildings and make it more colorful and fun. Street art is less concerned with letters, but emphasizes the visual image, contextual use of space, and uses a wider range of materials that extend beyond the spray can. And that being said, I don't know if I want to say more impressed, but I am very impressed when graffiti and street artists do intricate, beautiful things with spray paint. Because spray paint is a difficult medium. So I'm actually impressed when they use spray paint. When we talk about street artists, Banksy usually comes up. Now, nowadays, I don't hear too much about Banksy, but like 10 years ago and leading up to that time, he was really, really popular. Banksy is a pseudonymous England-based street artist and political activist whose real name and identity remain unconfirmed and the subject of speculation. So pseudonymous means kind of half anonymous, meaning there is a person who calls themselves Banksy. It is a man, and he has an Instagram account, and he communicates with the public through the account, and he communicates with news people, and he'll do interviews. But usually in the interview, they obscure his face and his voice because he doesn't want to be known. And one of the reasons for that, yeah, it creates more buzz for the art. But the other thing is, a lot of his art is illegal. He's not getting permission from these cities. And so realistically, he could get arrested for the art he's done. So that's the other reason why he keeps his identity pretty anonymous. He first gained popularity in the late 1990s, and like I said, really was popular into like the mid 2000s into the 2010s. One of the cool things is when Banksy was coming to your town, I don't think he came to Michigan ever, maybe Detroit, but not in our area. Um, but if he says, "Hey, I'm coming to Coopersville," he would say on Instagram, "I'm coming to Coopersville these dates." But then he wouldn't say anything else. And then everyone in Coopersville and around Coopersville and tourists from outside of town would come flocking, ready. And then after he gets here, he'd post an Instagram photo of like part of a piece of art. And basically, you would then have to do a scavenger hunt in Coopersville to find it. And it's bragging rights. Whoever finds it first and gets to post the first Instagram picture of the new Banksy art, they're going to be the ones interviewed, like, oh, how'd you find it? Things like that. It uses street art to unite communities and help get it seen as a legitimate form of art. Here is an example of a Banksy piece. You can see that he used the buildings as well as trash that was left behind. And some people would argue, like, oh, that's not real art because you're using trash. He and the people that liked him would argue that it is art. And, you know, you left the trash out. At least I'm making it fun to look at because it's taking parts of the city that we wouldn't normally see. Oh, yeah. Um, Street art can bring people outside, and that can be good. We all need outside time. Sometimes street art is a little more accessible than museum art. A museum, usually, if it's a newer building, it's ADA compliant, meaning if you have physical disabilities, you'll have access, elevators, things like ramps, stuff like that. Street art, well, I was going to say, museums are also, they cost money. The good thing is in Southwest Michigan, most of our museums have free days. Well, they will say like, you know, the second Tuesday of every month you can get in for free. But for the most part, it usually costs admission. And there's dress code. There's things that might limit certain communities, like the homeless community, from accessing the art. Versus street art is free. And yeah, there's still going to be physical accessibility issues depending on where the art is, but it's usually a little more accessible to the general public. Because you don't have to like dress for a dress code, you don't have to worry about paying admission, or certain hours. Street art you can go look at 2 a.m. if you want. Can't really do that with a museum. So a couple of examples of street art and murals. This is the mural I do not like, and I apologize if you personally painted it. You probably didn't. But if you know who painted it, please don't think I'm saying it's bad art. That is not what I'm saying. I think the technique is well done. It's very realistic. It's photorealistic. Like it's well done. The art technique is there. I think I need to look into it more because if I understood what they were trying to tell me or what the theme was, maybe it would make more sense to me. But for me, it's just very cluttered and I don't know what they're trying to tell me. There's a cow on the left being dangled. There's a bunch of floating heads. I don't know. It's downtown Grand Rapids on the side of Kendall College. I see it almost every day, and every day I stare at it and go, I don't get you. Um, but that's where I joke that if art is supposed to make you feel something, I am feeling something. It's confusion, but I'm feeling something. Sometimes they don't have to convey much of anything. They're just fun. This guy, I took this picture in Pullman, Washington. I did not have a car there. And if you've ever lived without a car, you're relying on public transportation and you find a lot of shortcuts to get from one bus stop to the next. And one of my shortcuts went behind a bunch of buildings. And when I did that, I saw this guy because I'd never seen him. I'd lived there like a year and I hadn't seen him because he was on the back of a building. I don't know what the artist was trying to convey, but I thought it was a very dapper gentleman, and I was like, I like him. The problem with street art and art in general is sometimes art is temporary. This mural was downtown Grand Rapids, and it's gorgeous, but it's not there anymore. I loved it. I did not take this picture, but I thought it was very pretty. And I was downtown. And my friend was with me, and I thought, ooh, I'm going to show you the mural I like. And we came around the corner, and it was gone. This whole wall was just white. And I stood there for a minute, contemplating, like, did I lose my mind? Did I hallucinate an entire mural? Thankfully, somebody else took a picture of it. So it did exist. I'm not crazy, at least in that place. Now, the cool thing is, while this one is gone, there is a new mural in place, and it is also very pretty. So it's kind of a bummer that this was temporary, but if it wasn't temporary, then I wouldn't have got to see the new mural. So it's kind of bittersweet. Yeah, it's a bummer that this one isn't there anymore, but now there's another mural, and odds are in a couple of years, they'll probably paint over it again and put up a new mural that I get to go stare at. And sometimes I still don't know what they mean. This one is from Poway, California in 2009. I doubt it's still there. It was on the side of a gas station and it made me laugh. I have no idea what it is. I don't know what they're trying to convey. I don't even know who the artist is. But every time I parked at that gas station, I saw these little birds and I thought, cute. So sometimes art just makes you smile or it makes you go, that's weird. But it at least gets you thinking. This little quote says, promoting and protecting street art while continuing to crack down on crude graffiti can be a way to augment society's happiness. So, like I said, sometimes crude graffiti bums people out, but beautiful, colorful art is a little more fun to look at. And so it helps people to kind of brighten their day. So looking at one of the examples from Kotak is the Kalabari of southern Nigeria. And what's really interesting is the type of art they make is the goal is not what most of our artists are focusing on. So most of our Western artists are focusing on making something consumable, something pretty. And I say most because there are some artists that like to kind of dabble in the profane or things that are so jarring that it makes us talk. But for the most part, we want art to be pretty. We want it to be enjoyable. The Kalabari, their wooden sculptures are not carved for art. They are carved for religious reasons only. And they are not supposed to be pretty. The picture on the slide is not the appropriate sculpture that we're talking about. I couldn't find any photos of those. And I think partially because they're not supposed to be beautiful, so they're not taking pictures of them. This is very similar, which is why I included this photo, so you can kind of get an idea of what they would have looked like, but not exact. These sculptures are meant to house religious spirits. And the idea is that the spirit already has an image, and you're not supposed to, what's the word I'm looking for? Stray. You're not supposed to stray from it. They're supposed to be repulsive. They're supposed to be ugly. They're not supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to just be a house for the spirit. And the idea is the spirit's not going to come into it unless it is a correct representation of the spirit. So you're not trying to make it beautiful and gorgeous, you're trying to make it accurate. So while anthropologists would look at these statues and say, ooh, art, they were saying, not really art, it's more just religion, and we have to make them look like this. Otherwise, the spirits get mad. When we look at non-Western art versus Western art focuses on individual creation. Now, that's not saying Western artists never collaborate, but for the most part, they usually work on their own, and it's because they're trying to build a name for themselves. Non-Western art tends to be credited only to the tribe rather than an individual artist. So if you go into an art museum, it's going to depend on what kind of museum, but there's probably going to be an exhibit of non-Western art. It might be from like Eastern Africa, Indonesia, depends. Where it's frustrating is when you go into those art exhibits, very frequently you'll look at a statue or a mask or a painting, and it'll say, this comes from Namibia and the Kungsan people, but it doesn't say a specific artist like it does with Western art. And there are two explanations. On one hand, non-Western art does have a tendency to be more collaborative, where people work together. The other unfortunate explanation is a lot of our stuff in museums is stolen. And yes, as an anthropologist, I love museums. I'm a nerd. I love them. But I'm also critical of them. A lot of the art we took, we looted. And I would argue that you're gonna know who made it if you stick around and ask. But we didn't. We just stole it in the night. So if you don't hang around to figure out who painted it or who sculpted it, then you're not going to know who to attribute it to for the art. So yes, non-Western art does tend to be more collaborative, but we also need to recognize that we've stolen a lot of it. So that's where I'm very 50-50 with museums. I love museums. I love that I can go to an art museum in, say, Chicago and see art from all over the world that I normally couldn't afford to travel to. But I also hope that we are getting that art ethically and we are crediting the artists. When we look at old art, it may not look like what we expect art to look like. So the Blombos cave dates to about 100,000 years ago. I mean, the cave is older, but what we found in the cave dates to about 100,000 years ago. The cave is on a cliff facing the Indian Ocean in South Africa. I can imagine it is probably a gorgeous view. And so ancient humans hung out in this cave a lot. We have found artifacts left by anatomically modern humans, meaning Homo sapiens from 100,000 years ago. Some of the art we have found bone tools with carvings. So, like the handle has a beautiful carving on it. We have found red ochre that was used as body paint. And we have found this stone. It is a very small stone that's a couple centimeters long with these marks on it. Now, you might look at those marks and say, nah, that's not art or it's bad art. The reason why we call it art is we have ruled out any of the common reasons to make marks on a stone. Sometimes we get marks on a stone because we're sharpening a tool. Sometimes we get marks on a stone because we're using it as an anchor. Um, these marks, we ruled out it was not sharpening a tool, it was not an anchor, it was not anything else we've seen, which means somebody 100,000 years ago sat in this cave and deliberately made these marks. Now, is it supposed to be a representation of something in real life? Maybe. I don't know. Could it just be the equivalent of a doodle? Yes, but even my crappy doodles in my notes still count as art. Maybe I wouldn't put it in a museum, but if you left my crappy doodles and secured them and made them safe for 100,000 years, they probably would end up in a museum just because they're old and we'd be impressed. Cave art, it's kind of hard to pinpoint down why we made it, but it can teach us a lot about ancient humans. I think I have a video, the only video I have today. Hopefully, my audio will work, but this is a little bit about why we may have made cave art.
Prehistoric people around the world chose to recreate nature through their art. And of course, the big question is why? I think we have this stereotype about prehistoric people as always being on the verge of starvation, always thinking about their next meal. And what we see 40, 50, 60,000 years ago in different parts of the world is that people actually lived quite rich lives. And we see that they're using their imagination, creativity, and in fact, even sense of humor in a lot of ways in the art that they're creating. Panel of the Spotted Horses is one of my favorite in all of cave art, and I've seen it reproduced 1,000 times in books and slides, but there's nothing like being in front of it. You see the colors, you see the textures. It's just completely different being right here. And then, of course, there are the handprints. For me, that's what really connects me to the art because I look at those hands and those are human. That's what connects us to the people who made these 25,000 years ago. Wow. One of the most important panels at Peshmeral is this one here, the Black Frieze. It was drawn about 25,000 years ago. And that I still have to try and get my mind around. And when you first look at it, it looks like this jumble of images. If you look at it really carefully, you'll see it's actually a bunch of different animals superimposed. So you have horses and bison and wild cattle, and actually my absolute favorite, the mammoths. This mammoth in particular is phenomenal for me because again, you've got this really simple contour. You know immediately just from that little dip here that it's a mammoth. But beyond that, the artist has also chosen to show this shagginess of its coat, right? And you can see that it actually kind of bends in one direction. It's almost as if there's wind or something that is, moving that coat as it's walking across the plain. And so you get this sense of movement. And this would have been even enhanced by the stone lamps, the torches they brought with them, the kind of flickering light, the same as if you were sitting around a campfire, that kind of flickering light. If you apply that to the images on the cave walls, it really does give them this sense of motion, and it's magical. I think we have to remember that creating art in a cave is not easy. They wouldn't have had all the benefits of electric light as we do. They would have perhaps brought with them torches, or they would have brought stone lamps. They would have also had to collect all the pigments that they were going to use to make the art. And then walking over difficult terrain that might have been slippy if it was wet outside. So all of these sorts of challenges in order to make the images that we're experiencing today. For me, the most compelling explanation is that these images were probably part of an oral storytelling tradition. Clearly, these people were incredibly knowledgeable about their natural environment. They knew the animals that they were painting. They also knew the kinds of materials that they were using for these paints. I mean, they made paints. They collected pigments and followed recipes when they were making their paints. They weren't just making pretty pictures, but they were actually storing knowledge outside their bodies. It gives it permanence. It's there for future generations. They brought that knowledge with them. As I make my way through the world, I'm not relying just on myself, but I'm actually relying on the knowledge of those in my community and all of those who came before me. And this is something that archaeologists refer to as cumulative culture. Really, storytelling is not the product of cumulative culture, but it's actually the vehicle for it. It's this grand total, this sum of all of the knowledge that we have that we then pass on from generation to generation over time. And that's what allowed humans to really adapt to all different kinds of environments as they moved out into the rest of the globe.
Okay. Only video I have for today. There's other videos linked. I'm just skipping them because I'd rather let you out a little early. Ethnomusicology, there's your long word of the day. It is the comparative study of the musics of the world and of music as an aspect of culture and society. It basically combines music and anthropology. What's fascinating is music exists in every culture. So I would argue there is something intrinsically human about wanting to create music. Even if you individually are like, I'm not a big fan of music. Culturally, species wide, we apparently are big fans of music. This picture on the slide is the Divje Bob flute. I can never pronounce it correctly. It is a very old flute, about 43,000 years old, and it is technically only part of a flute. We believe there were ends on either end that broke off, but it is carved out of a bone. And what's fascinating is we can figure out, okay, yeah, a bone with holes in it, that could have been an adornment, like something you sew onto your clothing to look pretty. But looking at the way the holes are, we can see that it was never used like sewn onto anything. And so most likely it was a flute. And it's kind of hard to say exactly what the flute was for. It could have been used to recreate bird noises, maybe if you're hunting. And it could have also just been to make music. We look at even modernly, audios, music links us, even if it's linking you to other people that hate it. I think of TikTok audios. That's why I have it up there. Sometimes an audio will go viral on TikTok and Instagram, and it's a new song, and it goes viral, and then everybody actually likes the song and downloads it, and that person, the artist, gets a bunch of plays. Sometimes it goes viral, and like half of the population hates it. Sometimes you bond with people over disliking the same art. But it still links us. I should have included a clip of it, but you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But there is a little bit of a song that people, in my opinion, have overused on Instagram and TikTok. And it's that little bit of the song that goes, oh no, oh no, 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 no. I'm not doing a great job. But anyways, it's so overplayed that I'm like, oh, I'm sick of it. I had no idea it was from an actual song. I was driving, listening to my Pandora station of like 1960s doo-wop, and all of a sudden a song came on and it sounded kind of familiar, but I was like, I don't know this song. And then it got to the chorus, and that was the chorus. And I kind of had that moment while driving of like, holy crap, I can't escape this audio even while I'm not on TikTok. But it did make me laugh because I was like, I guess it had to come from somewhere. So the whole song was nice, but that one part, I was like, I don't want to hear it anymore. How we learn to appreciate art, or how we appreciate art, is learned. I should put it that way. We learn from the adults around us, and we learn within particular cultural settings. We learn from exposure. That is why some art forms are considered highbrow, meaning you have to be wealthy and classy to enjoy them. And I think a great example is opera. Most operas are not sung in English and they're really big productions. So most operas, at least historically, it used to be that it was expensive to go to. And because it was expensive, it was a cultural moment. So yeah, you went for the opera, but you also went to see people and be seen. So you had to dress up and you had to dress really up. Nowadays, you can probably go to an opera in jeans and a nice shirt, and nobody's going to bat an eye. And it's probably going to be a little more affordable. But it also is accessible by big cities. If you live in the middle of nowhere, you're probably not going to be exposed to opera. I have never seen an opera. I've seen clips of them, but I've never sat down and watched an opera. And I don't know if I would enjoy it because, one, it wouldn't be in a language I know. You can probably still figure out the plot, but it's a little easier if you speak the language. And two, I wasn't raised with opera. Versus the fancy elite usually look down on what they consider lowbrow art. So, lowbrow art, if we're thinking music, if opera is highbrow and classical music, country music is usually considered lowbrow. And so when I was raised very country. My dad worked in country radio his whole life. My mom was a country singer. So I was very country. And so even though now I don't listen to modern country, 80s and 90s country and before has a special place in my heart. And I don't care if I became the wealthiest person in the world. I would still be bumping Patsy Cline. Um, so yeah, sometimes we have these connotations around art being classy or not. And sometimes we end up liking the same art as a parent. I love 80s, 90s country because that's what I was raised with. However, I also really love 90s hip hop and some new hip hop. That's not something my parents ever listened to. So sometimes we strike out on our own. Media connects us throughout the globe, allowing us to share culture quickly and widely. Connection to the wider world is a way to move beyond local standards and expectations. Even when temporary, media can connect us. That oh no no audio from TikTok, 10 years from now, if I play that clip in a room, I'm probably going to get a bunch of people going, ugh, turn that off, because we're probably still going to be sick of it. It unites us, even though it's old. How many different versions of Pride and Prejudice have there been? I honestly don't have an answer for you. A lot. Some are better than others. My personal favorite is the 2005 version with Keira Knightley. My sister and I quote a more obscure scene from that version. This scene on the GIF, long story short, this gentleman is very, very awkward, Mr. Collins, and he's trying to woo and compliment the ladies. And his compliment is, "What excellent boiled potatoes." My sister and I quote that if there's an awkward family moment. One of us will text the other, "What excellent boiled potatoes." Um, it's a random thing, but it links us. Sometimes you quote movies with friends, you quote TV shows, you quote TikTok audio. It links us. And nowadays, media is more and more a way that links us around the world. I may have mentioned this last week, so I'm sorry if it's repetitive, but I brought up the New York City mayoral election. I'm not a New Yorker. I've been there once, so I'm definitely not voting in their mayor race. And yet, I knew the three main candidates that were running. I saw memes, I saw clips of the debates, I saw people talking about them, and people on the other side of the world had the same experience. They have no skin in the game for the mayoral race in New York City, but here I am knowing who's running and catching myself hoping a certain candidate won, even though I know it's not going to change my life at all, who is the New York City mayor. I mean, maybe eventually if they continue on in politics, but right now it's not going to affect me at all. Online access is new. For most of human history, the main ways to link groups socially were marriage and trade. Now we can link through social media. Modern media offers contacts, information, entertainment, and potential social validation. Now, social validation, I'm going to urge a little bit of caution because a little social validation is good. It helps us feel like we're on the right track and we're doing a good job of being human. But where I urge caution is we don't want to become so reliant on social validation that we lose our identity, that we are only doing what the rest of the world thinks we should do. But where social validation is beneficial is making you feel less alone. So think of it this way. I'm going to use goths as an example. So let's say you live in Escanaba up in the Upper Peninsula. Escanaba is a lovely place, but it's a very small town compared to even like Grand Rapids. Let's say you live in Escanaba and you are goth. And realistically, you're probably going to be the only goth in Escanaba. So if you put together your goth outfit and you perfect your goth makeup and you go to the IGA grocery store in Escanaba, people are going to notice, but they might be giving you negative attention because you're going to stick out. Versus you're still stuck in Escanaba. You put together your great goth outfit and you pose a little photo shoot, take a couple photos, and you post them on Instagram. And with the correct hashtags, you find your community. They may not live in the same city as you, but they're other goths who can say, "Ooh, I like your eyeliner. Ooh, I like your big stompy boots." Things like that. You get that validation of like, okay, I may not be physically surrounded by my type of people, but I know my type of people exist and they are validating my identity. So that can be very beneficial to us to get a little social validation. Looking at the internet's international spread, 77% of people in 34 countries reported occasional internet use. And the top five internet countries are China, India, us, and Indonesia and Brazil. And you can kind of piece together that those countries are also the most populous. The bigger the country, the more likely it is that they're going to be industrialized. And nowadays, that means internet. Because of the internet, we're finding out things way faster than we used to. If you think of the Titanic sinking in, what was it, 1912? If I lived in Michigan in 1912 and the Titanic went down, I would hear about it, but it wouldn't be within the day. I would hear about it maybe a week or so later because what would have to happen is New York would find out probably first because they were the ones expecting the ship. Then the New York papers are going to post about, oh my God, the Titanic went down. And then Boston's going to pick it up. And then Chicago's going to pick it up. And eventually the Grand Rapids press will pick it up. But it's going to be a while before they find out about it. So I won't find out right away. Versus now, if the Titanic went down, I mean, look at, okay, I'm not trying to make fun, but look at the billionaire that went in the little submarine to try to look at the Titanic wreck. That wasn't even, I'm not trying to make light of people dying, but that wasn't as big of a loss of life as the original Titanic, but it was still a loss of life. And we found out about it right away. I didn't live anywhere near the Titanic. I didn't live anywhere near where this billionaire was. I didn't know him before that, but I was very aware when that thing went down. Well, it went down anyways, but it imploded. The good news of that, if you didn't pay attention, the Titanic submersible, the little submarine where like six people died, the only good thing about that is allegedly it was so quick, nobody even knew. No, nobody had a moment. So that's the saving grace, is like at least there was no suffering or anything. Sorry, that was a bummer. Um, Okay, so looking at Americans' internet use, 90% of American adults routinely go online, but there are quite a few people, that means 10% don't. Most of us that use the internet now have smartphones. I have a laptop, I'm using it right now, and I need it for work. But if I worked somewhere else, Meyer, a factory, corporate America, I probably wouldn't even need a laptop. I can do pretty much everything on my phone. I only need the laptop for PowerPoints, creating them, and Zoom like this so I can share my PowerPoints. But otherwise, I'm using my smartphone. And so, yeah, smartphones are really expensive, but it's becoming more and more common that just about everybody has one. Looking at social media and trust, the Pew Research Center conducted a survey in 2011 where they said participation in social media enhances social connectivity. When the internet and social media first became popular, there were a lot of naysayers that said, oh my gosh, having the internet in our home is going to make us all hermits, and we're never going to socialize, and we're never going to go out in public. And so they thought it was going to isolate us and make us lonely. In reality, what we've now found is similar to the Escanaba goth anecdote. Um, it connects us. So if you are a hermit, let's say you are an introvert and you don't like going out in public, we know that we are social creatures, and you may not need as much social interaction as an extrovert, but you still need some. And so now, let's say you're a gamer, and I don't know what game you play, but it's even a game. I'm not a gamer, but I know there are some games you play with other people and some you don't. So even the ones that you don't play with other people, like Stardew Valley, there's still communities online of other people that play Stardew Valley, and you can talk about like, I grew pumpkins and it was a good crop and stuff like that, or trying to woo the village. I played Stardew Valley for like a month. I was really into it for a month and then I just lost interest. So I know a little bit about it. But you find community, and so it's actually making us more social. What's interesting though is it's also making us more trusting, which is good and bad. Facebook users we're especially trusting, and I would argue possibly too trusting. As you can see with the image on the slide, you and I would look at this image and go, oh, that is obviously AI. But if you're on Facebook, you may have grandma who is posting a picture exactly like this and saying things excitedly like, ah, this little boy in Africa made this bicycle. And you're looking at it like, grandma, that boy's not real. That's not a real bicycle. None of this is real. AI is getting better, which is also worse in my opinion, but it's getting harder to differentiate. Sometimes it's painfully obvious, and sometimes it's Facebook users that are the ones that are sharing links and articles without actually reading them. So please, if you're somebody that shares articles online, read the article first, not just the headline, because sometimes the headline's a little deceiving. Now, I have a couple of slides left, and I'll give you a heads up before I let you out. But sports and culture, talk about sports for a few slides. Sports figures are performers, not unlike within art and media. They may be a different type of performance, a different type of skill, but they have conduct rules, and sports and media reflect our culture and influence. Athletes can become famous just for their athletic prowess. And so you have athletes that aren't really good actors, but they get brand deals. So they'll do a commercial. And we can notice there are some athletes that do commercials where you are like, oh, this is painfully obvious that you are not an actor. Like, stick to sports, that is where you're good. Then you have people like the woman on the screen, Alona Mar, who I adore. Um, I'm not a huge rugby fan, but I know she's a very powerful and talented rugby player. She's also a really fun personality. One of the reasons why she's become so popular is one, she's pretty, and we do like pretty people. And two, she's talented. She's talented on the field and off. She has created a really big Instagram following because of how personable she is. And what's interesting is her sisters are also really funny. It's just a funny family. But she's done really well outside of sports. She's done the Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover. She's done Dancing with the Stars. She's done a bunch of brand deals and podcasts. And part of it is she's a performer. Yes, she is an athlete and she's very, very good at that. But if she, hopefully not, I'm not wishing any ill will on her, but if something happened where she had a debilitating injury and she couldn't do rugby anymore, I think she would still have a career as a performer. Versus some athletes, they're athletes and that's like what they do. Looking at American football, nearly half the American population watches the Super Bowl every year. Now, I would argue not all of us are actually watching the football. I go to Super Bowl parties because there's deviled eggs and my friends and commercials and the halftime show. And I watch a little bit of the football and I kind of know the basics, but I'm not a big football fan. So realistically, we're being exposed to football, but I'm not there for the football. But we're watching it. Some critics will argue that Americans love football because we love violence, because American football is pretty violent. There's physical tackling, um, falling, running, smacking into each other. And that's why they wear the helmets. They're not 100% perfect, but that's why we wear the helmets. So the argument is, well, because American football is violent, that's why we like it. Ahrens, an anthropologist, argued in 1981 that on one hand, there are plenty of violent cultures that have not adopted American football. It is called American football because we're pretty much the only ones playing it. We're also the only ones that call it football. Um, Soccer is what we call the other sport in our country, but we're the only ones. The rest of the world calls soccer football because you actually use your foot. American football, only the kicker uses his foot. So it's interesting the names, but that's the differentiation. So there are a lot of societies that are as violent as us, if not more violent, but they have not adopted American football. I would argue rugby and hockey might even be more violent. Hockey has more padding, but if you watch hockey, they frequently rip it off so they can beat the crap out of each other. And rugby uses no helmets or padding, and they're tackling and also beating the crap out of each other with no helmets. So I would argue those two are probably a little more violent. Ahrens brings up a good point. He says America loves football not because of the violence, but because it highlights teamwork based on a division of labor. And that is how we organize a lot of our like corporations, our businesses. So we like the sport because we can use its analogy, like we talked about sports slang. We can use that term to talk about like corporate America and things like that. Many things influence a sport's success internationally, cultural values, social forces, and media. Similar to like opera, if you are not exposed to a certain sport, you may not even know it exists. I didn't know cricket was a thing until I was a teenager, because cricket is not a popular sport in the US versus in the UK and India, really popular. Um, Also, nowadays, we do have more access to more sports. So look at the Olympics. Every 4 years, the Olympics happen. And I will fully admit that for about 3.5 years, forget figure skating exists. And then the Olympics happen, and I go, holy crap, I love figure skating. And I watch it and I love it and I get into it. And then the Olympics end, and then I forget about it for like 3.5 years. I don't know why. I'm just not exposed to it as often. Um, Similarly, when you're exposed to new sports, you know they exist and you might start to follow them a bit more. When I was a kiddo in the 80s and 90s, the Olympics were whatever NBC was showing on air at the time. Didn't have like ESPN, didn't have streaming. Now, if I want to watch figure skating in April on a non-Olympic year, I can Google it and probably find it. Um, oh, I had something else to say and now it's gone. Nope, it's gone. Okay. Hopefully it wasn't too important. So, being versus doing. We talked many weeks ago about ascribed status versus achieved status. Ascribed is what one is, and achieved is what one does. We love the concept of the American dream, that idea that you can come to America or be born here and come from rags, meaning poor, very poor, disenfranchised. And through your hard work and dedication, you can work your way up to wealthy. Realistically, that's hard to do. One of the fastest routes, I'm not saying easiest, but fastest, is becoming a celebrity athlete. Athleticism is one of the few things that can get you out of poverty if you're good at it. That's why you have people from poorer communities. If they have a kid who, say, is really good at gymnastics, they will start training them to be a gymnast because they recognize that if this kid becomes a very good gymnast, they will get money, they will get brand deals, they will get travel, and all of these opportunities they don't otherwise have. And it helps us, regular people, feel like it's attainable. So if we have like the hometown hero, I'm trying to think of like, I'm thinking of schools when they claim a celebrity. I got my master's at Western Michigan University. And when I got there, Terry Crews, the celebrity, he's still popular now, but I don't hear about him as often. He was really popular at the time. And I found out that he went to Western Michigan University. I had no idea. And Western is very proud of that. And they like to kind of say that because it's their way of telling their students, like, he was a fellow student just like you, and look how popular and wealthy he is now. You can do the same thing. Realistically, I'm never going to be as famous or wealthy as Terry Crews, even though we went to the same school. That's okay. I don't really want that fame. But I also haven't, I'm not a professional athlete or an actor, so there's a reason why he's a celebrity. But we like that idea. It makes us feel like it's more attainable. Okay, bear with me a second, couple announcements, and then I'll let you go. So, next week, how it's going to work. So, what I'm going to do is, originally, I had another PowerPoint we were going to go over this week about the Maori people. I think it is online if you want to check it out on your own, but I will not be quizzing you about it on the exam because we did not get over it. Only this lesson will be included. The exam, I'm gonna get it available. Honestly, I might make it available today, which is early, but if you want to get it done, you can. It will be available online later today, and it'll be due no later than midnight on next Friday. I know that's a little funky because I usually make things due on Saturday, but that is technically when the semester ends, so it needs to be done on Friday. It'll be set up exactly like the other two exams, online, 90 minutes, a combination of matching, multiple choice, and essay. You can use your notes. And if you want an in-person exam, I am more than happy to do that for you. Just let me know so that we can show up either Tuesday or Thursday morning. I'll show up and bring a printed exam. Just reach out to me and let me know. I'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, that is the end, and I will not see you anymore. If you like my teaching style, you can sign up for physical anthropology next semester. I will be teaching that in Coopersville again, same time. It's a little bit more about human evolution and archaeology, but it is fun. I am behind on grading, so I apologize. I will get that done today, and then we'll go into the rest of the end of the semester knowing where we stand. I will get it all updated. I think that is all I have for you today. I'm sorry I don't have the teaching assistant. He is upstairs sleeping, the cat. Otherwise I would like show him to you, but you just get me. So that is all I have. I will stop rambling. Have an awesome holiday. Good luck on your exams. Thank you for joining me today. Have a good rest of your day. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.